Low socioeconomic status affects low school achievement. Why? Take a look at the 5 reasons here. The first one, low expectations beget low self-esteem. Why? Well, because low socioeconomic status students may wear old clothes, speak ungrammatically, or be less familiar with books and school activities. Teachers and other students may assume that these students are not bright. The teacher may avoid calling on them to protect them from the embarrassment of giving wrong answers, or because they make the teachers uncomfortable. The children come to believe that they aren't very good at school. Learned helplessness. Well, due to learned helplessness is due to internal, stable, and uncontrollable factors. And we'll come to this one in later on in attribution, right? All right. Low socioeconomic status children or students may be the victims of learned helplessness, but that is low socioeconomic status students or any students who fail continually may come to believe that doing well in school is hopeless. Many of their friends and relatives never finished school, so it seems normal to quit. Well, in fact, about 1/4 of children from poor families drop out of school. And that is true in the States, United States, in the low socioeconomic Black folks, and also in Canada, our indigenous children. Right? Now, without a high school diploma, these students find new rewards awaiting them in the work world. Many available jobs, they barely pay a living wage. If the head of a family of 3 works full-time at the minimum or a living wage, say minimum wage, the family's income will still be at least something like 2,500 to 3,000 or even more at this point, okay, below the poverty line. Okay. Low socioeconomic status children, particularly those who also encounter racial discrimination, become convinced that it is difficult, if not impossible, for them to advance in the mainstream by doing well in school. Right? Now, there's something called the resistance culture. Some researchers have suggested that low socioeconomic status students may become part of a resistance culture. To members of this culture, making it in school means selling out and trying to add middle class in order to maintain their identity and their status within the group. Remember group conformity. Low socioeconomic status students may reject the behaviors that would make them successful in school. For example, studying, cooperating with teachers, even coming to class. Right? So some psychologists have linked one. I have linked one resistance culture to poor Hispanic Americans in the United States, Native Americans, and African American groups of blacks, and of course our first one, nations students. Okay, but similar reactions have been noted for poor white students, both in the United States and in England. Research studies have indicated that's the case. Right? All right. So another one is tracking. What is tracking? Well, another explanation for lower achievement of many low SES students is that these students experience a different academic socialization. That is, they are actually taught differently. If they are tracked into kind of a low ability or general classes, they may be taught to memorize and be passive recipients of information. Okay? Their classes may be low level and teacher dominated. Okay? Middle class students are more likely to be encouraged to think and create in the classes. When low SES students receive an inferior education, their academic skills are inferior and their life chances are limited. All right, so that's the kind of difficulty that they encounter. All right, we'll come to this later on. All right, child rearing style. The oldest explanation for the academic problems of low SES children is that their home environment does not give them the Head Start in school. Remember the Head Start program, okay, back in 1965, okay? Their home environment does not give them the Head Start in school provided by middle and upper class homes. Adjustment to school may be more difficult for these children. Since schools tend to value and expect the behaviors more often taught in middle class homes, right? So studies have actually shown that middle class mothers talk more, give more verbal guidance, help their children understand the causes of events, events, and make plans and anticipate consequences, to direct their children's attention to the relevant details of a problem. And rather than impose solutions, they encourage the children to solve problems themselves. So by assisting their children in these ways, mothers are actually following Vygotsky's advice to provide intellectual support, or we call it intellectual scaffolding in the children's zones of proximal definition. So let's take a look at this here. CTEC is poor, so text grades also poor, and then what? Family blames the teacher, teachers blame the family, and well, look at what text future, right? And so anyway, all right. I put it in both. Okay, I will take a look at this later. Well, socioeconomic one. There are other variables affecting schools for social climate. Okay, so socioeconomic status of the school affects the competitive one climate of the school. All right, so let's take a look at one. Take a look at this one, at this study. All right, good. Now, socioeconomic what status of schools. You have what working class and middle class, and what the socioeconomic status of the students. Yeah, but working class and middle class. So the dependent variable is chances of going to college, like going to university. You see here, middle class always was better than what working class, like middle class, much significantly better than what low socioeconomic class. Okay, whether in what chances of going to college. Okay, regardless of what socioeconomic of the student. You see what I mean? So socioeconomic status of the schools has a lot of influence on what on students' probability of getting into university. School facility. So take a look at here, size and quality of library, number of science labs, okay, and amount of lab equipment, and plus the size of the school. They have no significant influence on student achievement. All right. Okay, let's take a look at what. Take a look at ethnicity and racial differences. Now, ethnicity is used to refer to groups that are characterized in terms of common nationality, common culture, or common language. So this shared sense of identity may be based on geography, religion, race, or language. Right? Now, race is defined what? Race is defined as a category composed of men and women who share biologically transmitted traits that are defined as socially significant, okay, such as skin color or hair texture. All right. Well, in effect, race is a label people apply to themselves and to others based on appearances. There are no biologically pure races. Okay, there are no such thing. All right. So take a look at what. Say, a lot of time you realize that the colors of the skin has a lot of influence on what? On socialization, on schooling, on what? Operation in the society, right? So let's take a look at on being black. It's of course here on being black or on being what? Belonging to a minority group, right? That type of thing. So it's similar. All right, so let's take a look at let's take a look at the first one here. That is what called the breaching syndrome, right? Caused by what we call the integration shock. For example, blacks came to America as slaves, right? But later on, of course, the society opened up, and then the blacks were integrated into the white society. All right, take a look at the existing currently the U.S. Supreme Court Judge Clarence Thomas Rice in he was chosen as a Supreme Court judge in America. Okay, His rise is an inspiring example for what? Example of the way many blacks have improved their lot. Of course, you realize that in general, black people in America, same as our Canada's indigenous people, they were systemically being discriminated. Now, for Clarence Thomas, a black Supreme Court judge, to rise, from a lawyer to a judge, then Supreme Court judge. Okay, here have shown to the world that there are opportunities too. But that is only part of the history that his backers, Clarence Thomas backers, care to talk about. That they downplay the possibility that Thomas' life may be a case study of the wrenching impact of what they call the integration shock. Right? So that is the name coined by Shelby Steels, okay, a very famous black scholar. Okay, that is what is integration shock. That is what the name coined for the intense feelings of racial inferiority and self-doubt that can assault and sometimes overwhelm blacks. Okay, like what Clarence Thomas, a black person. Okay, they were these people were suddenly taken from their familiar surroundings and plunged into a previously all-white world. As Supreme Court judge, when Clarence Thomas was appointed the Supreme Court judge, he was the only black one in that court. And of course, now here another black woman joined the Supreme Court. So there are two. Okay, so psychiatrists have identified a variety of disorientations blacks can suffer as a result of such immersions. The symptoms can range from an angry repudiation of whites to an emotional identification with whites so complete that the victims, like Clarence Thomas, undergo what University Professor Ronald Hall in 2018 describes as a bleaching syndrome, in which they deny any connection with blacks, just like so Clarence Thomas is a very good example, and Michael Jackson another example. All right. So let's take a look at on being black. The second was syndrome. It's called the token black syndrome. Say, it is also called TBS. Okay, TBS. Okay, by Greyer and Cobbs. Okay, all right. So what is TBS? Token black syndrome. Okay, TBS often afflict blacks who were the first of their families to graduate from college or land a high-paying job. So TBS has become more widespread in recent years, as a white backlash against affirmative action. Okay, what is affirmative action? Well, affirmative action is like this. It is applied in the following situation. So it is by law. Okay, by law. So both United States and Canada implemented affirmative action. So when two candidates apply for a position, one white, one black, or one female, one male. Okay? Two of them with the same qualifications, same experience, same everything. Then by law, affirmative action dictates that that the minority or the black or minority should be hired, and if it's the male, female, the female should be hired. So that's called affirmative affirmative action. Okay, now affirmative action here. Why? Okay, because what? The thinking is what? Model. Okay, models. We don't have enough black CEOs or female CEOs. We need to build more models, so that to inspire newcomers. So to make sure that an equitable field exists out there. Okay, it is to fight discrimination, right? So that is called what? That is called what? Affirmative action. All right. So affirmative action. It's been quite 2 decades at least. Okay, has swept across the U.S. and Canada. So on campuses and in the workplace, the prevailing view is that blacks are not required and are unable to meet the same standards for admission, college admission, university admissions, and promotions as whites. So therefore, that is one of the results from affirmative action. That is what they look at blacks as they don't require. They don't meet the same standards for admission, for promotion as whites, that type of thing. All right. So in the face of such assaults, vulnerable blacks can unconsciously accept the negative images attributed to their race. So that but then were scary to distance themselves from those images by words or this, denying that luck, family support, and other factors, including affirmative action, may help them. See, so they deny that. And TBS victims can themselves can con themselves into believing they have made it solely because they are exceptionally gifted individuals who are intimately superior to less fortunate members of the race. So they often exhibit disdain for poor blacks, for poor indigenous people, especially those who are on welfare or have given birth to a child out of wedlock. Okay, they believe if more blacks were like me, or more indigenous people were like me, intelligent instead of stupid, hardworking instead of lazy, educated instead of ignorant, morally upright instead of slavery racial, slavery like discriminatory, that type of thing, racial progress would be assured. Okay, that's called the token black syndrome. Okay, they look down on their own people. It's just to raise their own position. All right, so let's take a look at the third point here. Denigrating the people they left behind is one. that is what that is the another problem. Okay, among what high achievers from any ethnic group, but for blacks, the problem is compounded because they belong to what psychologists call the most despised race in the human community of races. Okay, bombarded from infancy with signals of their inferiority from both whites and blacks, black children all too often incorporate negative racial stereotype into their own self-image. The result can be crippling self-hatred. Right? Well, that is because due to the long legacy of discrimination in the United States, and of course, same happens to our indigenous people in Canada. All right, in Canada. Now, recent research confirms that anti-black stereotypes remain pervasive among African Americans. So, in about 20 some years ago, the survey of racial attitudes by the National Opinion Research Center, for example, indicated that 30% of the black questioned agreed. What they agree? They agreed that members of their own race were less intelligent than whites. 57% of whites held the same view. Okay, so, it is It is bad because yes, 57 of whites, we know that's the case, okay? But 30% of blacks, they adopted this attitude that is problematic. Is that right? All right. Now, racially disparaging attitudes remain endemic, even among highly educated and successful African Americans. All right. Now, Gloria Johnson Powell, famous black psychiatrist at Harvard University, she cites a study from the early 80s of psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers that these people found that in several areas, black professionals held more stereotypical negative views of black behavior than their white counterparts. Okay? So some African American professionals look down their nose at another African American who is they call a shame to the race. Okay, so that's what Johnson Powell found. Okay, she also found that they swallow the stereotype and often will be harder on African Americans than whites will be. Okay, now how difficult it can be for a black in a predominantly white environment to keep things in perspective. So that's the question. Okay? Now, even the most self-confident blacks cannot escape the fear that their work is being evaluated by a different yardstick than the one used to measure work done by whites. So worst of all, the feeling that you're participating in an unfair experiment in which the reputation of the entire race is riding on your performance. Okay, if you succeed, you are judged an exception. But if you fail, well, what did anyone expect from a black? You know what I'm trying to say? So that's the kind of situation for Black people, okay, for Black people, and the same, pretty much the same one applies to indigenous people in Canada, right? So this is not good, okay? Does not bode well for the minority groups. All right. Anyways, so we are just trying to understand this, okay? Now let's take a look at oh, good ethnic. Take a look at ethnic and racial differences in school achievement. On tests of cognitive ability, white students are above the national average, while Black and Hispanics are below the national average in what? In reading, writing, and mathematics. The same is what the same what holds for Canada's indigenous people. All right. Now, most researchers agree that these differences are mainly the legacy of discrimination, the product of cultural mismatches, say different cultures, okay, different culture, or or the result of growing up on a low socioeconomic status environment. Right? Okay. Now, because many minority group students are also economically disadvantaged, it is important to separate the effect of these two sets of influences on the school achievement. When students from different ethnic and racial groups who are all at the same SES, economic status level, then their achievement differences will diminish. Okay, so that is the same one. SES has a lot to do with what? Has a lot to do with success in school as well as success in a lot of things. Okay? All right. Take affirmative action versus sameness of treatment. Peter Chow published a paper in, can't remember, maybe 1990. Okay. Now, sameness of treatment is to treat everybody the same, no exception. Okay, no exception. So equifinality means equal outcomes. Okay, equal outcomes. So we aim at what? We aim at the concept of equifinality. So let's hope that we get equal outcome, okay, sameness of treatment. We treat everybody the same. However, this view here is that if there is no good role model, okay, no matter what kind of sameness of treatment you give the children, okay, and the minority groups still they lack the model to look up to, okay, to look up to. But then if we try to stress let us keep it as a goal for all students to have equal outcome. That's to say, for example, to be able to graduate to graduate from high school. Okay. Now, so equifinality allows us to aim at the outcomes. So we should do things to make sure that equal outcomes should be and can be achieved. Right. So then then this is the way that we plan ahead. This is the way to as a guidance light, as a guiding light for us to to plan ahead, to structure a program so that all students will enjoy the same outcomes, okay, a finality. All right, so let's take a look at the next one here. Culture and group memberships, okay? So there are many definitions of culture. Okay? Most include the knowledge, rules, traditions, attitudes, and values that guide behavior in a particular group of people. Right? So we know that what the group creates a culture. That is a program for living and what? And communicates what? The culture to members. That the people are members of groups. They are not members of cultures. Okay? Groups can be defined along what regional, ethnic, religious, racial, gender, social class, or other lines. Each of us is a member of many groups, so we all are influenced by many different cultures. Sometimes the influences are incompatible or even contradictory. For example, a feminist, but also a Catholic. You know, the Catholic Church. It does not allow women to be ordained. Okay, all right. A certain culture we will refer to, for example, the American culture is simply a collection of groups and the sort of things they think of, the sort of things that they do. Right? And of course, we do have cultural differences. Okay, that the visible signs of culture, such as costumes and marriage tradition, represent only a small portion of the differences among cultures. Many of the differences are below the surface. Okay, they are implicit, unstated, and even unconscious biases and beliefs. Right? Each cultural group teaches its members certain lessons about living, right? About living. So somewhat, uh, some even suggest that culture defines IQ. Right? Something, for example, you will see later on that Gardner, suggests that the culture somehow can define IQ. Okay, well, we'll come to that later on. Okay, now, for example, physical grace is essential in the Balinese social life. So, the question to the question is, the master physical movement is a mark of IQ in that culture. However, manipulating words and numbers, logical, mathematical, linguistic, these are important in Western societies. So in this culture, such skills, logical, mathematical, and linguistic skills are indicators of IQ. Okay, all right. So now, for example, in old China, fluent in poetry and good at horse riding and shooting arrows while you're riding a horse, they were considered to be highly desirable and were considered to be indicators of high IQ. Right? So that type of thing. So we have lots of cultural differences among different peoples. All right. So, cultural conflicts are usually about what below the surface differences, because when subtle cultural differences meet, misunderstandings are common. Therefore, what the members of a different culture may be misperceived as rude, slow, or even disrespectful. Okay. For example, most what Chinese talk loud, most, not all. Okay. All you have to do is visit a Chinese restaurant, and you will see that what you could hardly talk to your next one, to your friend sitting next to you. Okay, wow, it is so lousy. Okay, all right. Now, in a small community, okay, people know one another. Okay, say in a small town of say 1,200, okay, everybody knows everybody else. Okay, so it is okay to walk across someone else's front yard or backyard. But if you do that in big cities, you may be given a taste of a bullet. Okay, people may shoot you. Okay, but for example, there are of course exceptions. Of course, different even within China, people tend to talk loud, but in this Suzhou community, or this is province, a territory called Suzhou. Okay, people are very quiet. Even when they quarrel, you don't see them yelling at one another. Okay, they go soft. Okay, well, that's the culture. Okay, that's the culture. All right. All right. Now, then take a look at take a look at different cultures. Okay, take a look at this take a look at this experiment. The dependent variable is whether the participants in the study attributed school failure to lack of effort by their own children. Okay, so So they counted They counted number of mothers who attributed school failure to lack of effort of their own children. Okay, and you see here mothers from China, they do that more than more than Chinese American mothers, those Chinese mothers living in America, than than the white American mother. Right? So you see different cultures, they have different opinions. So that's why we have cultural conflict. Okay. Now, also take a look at the infamous residential schools in Canada. Okay, and the last school was closed in 1996. Okay, so you see here the residential schools in Canada was created on I think it is on April in 1884, so quite a long time, funded and operated by the government of Canada, and of course the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, Methodist, Presbyterian, and the United Churches in Canada. Okay, and they operated up to January the 1st, 1996, when the last residential schools is called the Gordon's Residential School in in Panichi. I think it's Panichi in Saskatchewan. Okay, it closed in the first day of 1996. So that's our Canada's infamous residential school. All right. Okay. Now take a look at take a look at culture and education. Okay, since the beginning of the 20th century, a flow of immigrants entered the United Kingdom, Western Europe, Canada, Australia, the United States, and many other developed countries. As these new immigrants arrived in most areas, they were expected to assimilate. Okay? Well, in the United States, they call it come, enter the cultural melting pot and become like those who had arrived earlier. So for years, the goal of American schools was to be the fire under the melting pot. Okay, immigrant children who spoke different languages and had different religions, okay, and cultural heritage were expected to come to the schools, master standard English, and learn to become mainstream American, right? So that's melting pot. But in Canada, we start since Pierre Trudeau, the father of Justin Trudeau, he favored multiculturalism. So in the early 70s, okay, all right. In the 60s and 70s, some educators suggested that minority group and poor students had problems in school because they had not fully assimilated into mainstream Western life. They had not adopted the right values and skills. So the students were described as culturally disadvantaged or culturally handicapped. So the assumption of the cultural deficit model was that the students' home culture was inferior because it had not prepared them to fit into the schools. That the cultural deficit model was the underpinning ideology for the creation of Canada's infamous residential school. Well, in those schools, we know now that native children were forced to abandon their cultures and their languages and were forced to speak English and learn the white way of life. Okay, children suffered immeasurably. Some were physically abused, and some were even sexually abused. Okay, mentally abused. Okay, that's very bad. Okay, that's very bad. Now, today we know that most people reject, and the most educators, most psychologists reject the idea of cultural deficit. They believe that no culture is deficient, but rather that there may be incompatibilities between the students' home culture and the cultural expectations of the schools. Okay? So, what are the expectations of schools? Well, both American and Canadian schools typically reflect a white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, middle-class, male-dominated values that have characterize what mainstream American, all right? Mainstream American, mainstream what Canadians, okay? All right. Now, for example, uh, students are expected to be on time and to do one activity at a time. Well, that's fine. Competition is encouraged. Cooperation is seen as cheating. Ah, ah, you you cooperate with one another, you cheat. Okay, that type of thing. All right. Words, ideas, and knowledge are more important than feelings. Spontaneous student talk or several students talking at once is discouraged. Working fast and being neat are valued. Is that right? Those are the things stressed in Canadian and American schools. Okay, but these values and expectations are not what's shared by all people. Okay, some groups teach people to put the good of the group ahead of the needs of the individual. Japan is a foremost is a good example because the entire society in Japan is group centered. Okay? The group is more important than the individual. Okay? But then in those group-centered society, you see the cooperation is valued, not individualism and not competition. You cooperate, you don't compete with one another. So, all right, and in those countries, in the group-oriented society, people are taught to rely on family and friends, particularly when resources are scarce. All right, like preserving genetic diversity, there is a growing recognition that schools have a responsibility to adapt to some extent to the values and skills of students instead of expecting every student to adapt to all the traditional expectations of the school. Is that right? Instead of what? So that is to say, the humanistic approach. Remember the third force in psychology, humanistic approach is is other-centered. So in education, it should be student-centered. Right? Is that right? It should be student-centered. So let's take a look at multicultural education. Okay, let's take a look at multicultural education. Well, the idea is that all students, male, female, disabled, rich, poor, from different racial and ethnic groups, ethnic background, or speaking different languages, all students should have a full and equal opportunity to learn in school and to be respected, not rejected, okay, and to be respected, okay. Multicultural education rejects the idea, here is that here to be respected or not to be rejected, okay, but I will change that. And multicultural education rejects the idea of the melting pot. So according to the multicultural ideal, that societies and schools, should be transformed into into a society that values diversity. Okay, so both Canada and America should be transformed into a society that values diversity. Schools should be transformed uh, should be transformed what into what into a place that values what diversity. All right, so that's what multicultural what education. But I'm sure that what when you go to the faculty of education, the program would have a lot to say about this. All right, okay. Gender role identity. So the word gender usually refers to judgments about masculinity and femininity. Judgments that are influenced by culture and context. In contrast, sex refers to biological difference, right? Say males, females, okay? So they are biologically different. Gender role identity is the image each of us has of ourselves as masculine or feminine in characteristics, or that is a part of our self-concept. Okay, of course, nowadays here we have trans, okay? We have transsexual, we have one non-binary. For example, Canada long recognized this, okay, Australia and even India. And April 11, 2021, is that right? 2021 or no, let me see. April 11 this year, 2022, okay. American passports under what gender has three choices: male, female, and another one is unknown, okay, or non-male, non-female. Okay, so it is the non-binary. So the recognition of what of we human being, we have is not just male and female. There are far more than this. Peter Chow published a paper, I can remember 2018. I think it is 2018. Okay? I argued, or me and my student, she graduated from grad studies. Okay, me and my students, we identify we argue. Okay, we argue, and of course, I am a psychometrician. Of course, we have scales to measure whether people are feminine or masculine, that type of thing. Anyway, in that paper, we identified at least 5 different sexes. Okay, of course, we didn't identify, but then we read from different papers, and we know that there are at least 5 different sexes biologically. Okay, biologically, all right. For example, men who have a womb inside the body, right? Something like that, or a female with male genitals. All right, that type of thing. Okay, we have that. Okay, it is just the old world cling on to the binary, say male, female. They don't tolerate, or they don't have the insight. They are narrow-minded. Okay? They don't have the insight to look at the diversity. Anyway, so let's take a look at the development of gender role identity. Okay, development of gender role identity. All of us may learn very early what it means to be male or female because of the actions of our parents in the first years of our life. Yes, in the first year of our life. Okay, Carl Jung. Okay? And when you think of Freud, you should think of Carl Jung, even though animosity developed later on in the friendship. Okay, but anyway, Carl Jung identified he has two notions of gender, okay, or femininity, masculinity. Anyway, Jung's notion of anima, a man's repressed feminine type qualities, and his notion of animus, a woman's repressed masculine type qualities. Now, repressed means what? Means it is beneath consciousness. This is consciousness. Beneath consciousness, that is to say, the person is not even aware of it. It is repressed. Of course, repression needs energy. It's like what? Like a block of ice. If you want to push it underwater, we could do that. This is called repression. We have to keep on pushing that ice, okay, that piece of ice underwater. If we let go, it will pop up. Okay, that type of thing. So repression, according to Freud, okay, requires energy to do that. Okay, and therefore, it kind of can deplete our what is it? Deplete our energy. Okay, or psychologically, is not healthy. All right, so let's take a look at sex typing. Okay, so sex typing, it occurs in different stages, according to what different psychologists. Remember Freud's phallic stage and Erickson's stage 3, the play age, initiative versus guilt, and then the resolution of that is called purpose. At 3 to 6 years old, that's the Piaget's concrete operational stage. Okay, I'm sorry, Piaget intuitive pre-operational stage. 7-11 is concrete operation. Anyway, all right, so that type of thing. So let us take a look. That's good. Let us take a look at parents' interactions with their children. Okay, parents' interactions with their children. So here, is between parents and sons, parents and daughter. So you see here, okay, parents interact more roughly and vigorously with boys. Okay? They touch male infants more at first, later keep male toddlers at a greater distance than female. That is, they're more protective of female toddlers. Okay, they're more time interacting with sons, trying to get the babies to smile. Okay, so instead of with the girl. Okay, react positively to assertive behavior, and then for daughters, react positively to emotional sensitivity. All right. Now, so white middle class parents value achievement, competitiveness, and emotional competitiveness, emotional control. Remember Burton White? Okay, a little competitiveness is good. And for daughters, parents value warmth and ladylike behavior. Okay, yeah. So that's the parents' interactions with the children. All right. Now, through their interactions with family, peers, teachers, and the environment in general, children begin to form gender schemas, or this is called the We will talk a bit more about shimmers, later on in later lectures, okay? Or called the organized networks of knowledge about what it means to be male, what it means to be female. So these shimmers help the children make sense of the world and what? Guide their behavior, all right? Guide their behavior. So let's take a look at what gender role stereotyping in the preschool years. Okay, so different treatment of the sexes and gender role stereotyping continue in early childhood. Boys are encouraged to be more physically active. Girls, on the other hand, are encouraged to be affectionate and tender. Okay? All right. Researchers have found that boys are given more freedom to roam the neighborhood, and they are not protected for as long a time as girls from potentially dangerous activities like playing with scissors or crossing the street alone. Okay, parents quickly come to the aid of their daughters, but are more likely to insist that their sons handle problems themselves. Okay. So therefore, independent and an initiative seem to be encouraged more in boys than in girls. All right. So let's take a look at what gender bias in the curriculum. All right. See here, most of the textbooks produced for the early grades before 1970s, before the 70s, okay, portrayed both males and females in sexually stereotyped roles. Okay, materials for the later grades often omitted women, okay, altogether from illustrations and text. Check it out, okay, check it out. Okay, now in a study of 2,760 stories in 134 books from 16 publishers. Okay? A group called Women on Words and Images back in 1975 found that the total number of stories dealing with males or male animals to be 4 times greater than the number of stories dealing with females or female animals. Okay, they did they also found that females tended to be shown in the home, behaving passively and expressing fear or incompetence. Males were usually more dominant and adventurous. They often rescue the females. All right. Now, in recent years, textbook publishers have recognized these problems to some extent and established guidelines to prevent them. Okay, but however, when researchers use the same design as Women on Words and Images, to analyze 62 elementary readers, that was they in 1990. You see what the first research in 1975. Now in 1990, they found that the number of male and female characters were about the same, so improvement. Girls were shown in a wide range of activity, but they were still portrayed as more helpless than boys. So the teacher's own attitude towards what? Towards sex difference. What is it? The belief that boys like what? Boys like to read stories about boys, and girls don't mind reading stories about boys. So why not assign stories about boys? It will help the boys to be motivated what to read, and it won't hurt the girls. Publishers seem to agree with this logic. However, the truth about reading preferences is not so simple. Okay? It appears that boys do like to read about male characters, but girls appear to prefer female characters. However, both sexes find stories about non-traditional females like Wonder Woman, okay, or one Superwoman, Supergirl, okay, all right. That non-traditional females to be at least as interesting as stories about traditional male characters. All right. Now, up to what here? Up to this point. Okay, up to this point, you see here, publishers, filmmakers, they what? They all of us. Well, it's gradually they what? They understand this. Okay, now for example, Pearson, the reformer of Allen and Bacon, okay, Prentice Hall, they approached me back in the year, let's say year 2000. Okay, they asked me if I'm interested in writing a book on what? On statistics, okay, that type of thing. But then what they reminded me that, well, Peter, the he and she should be balanced. You may refer to researcher as a he and teacher as a she, but the he and she must be balanced. That type of thing. Okay, that type of thing. So that means what? Publishers, they already had the awareness. They already realized, and they want to bring forth and an equal playing field at that time. Right? So that's good. Right? That's good. Now, let's take a look at at sex discrimination in the classrooms. Okay, sex discrimination in the classroom. One of the best documented findings of the past 10 years, 20 years is that teachers interact more with boys. Okay, now the past 30 some years, okay, teachers interact more with boys than with girls. This is true from preschool to college, okay, even now, okay. So teachers ask more questions of males, okay? And teachers give more feedback, like praise, criticism, correction to male students, not that much to female students. Okay, teachers give more specific and verbal comments to boys, not so much to girls. All right, take a look at that here. Okay, now as girls move through the grades, they have less and less to say. By the time students reach college, men are twice as likely to initiate comments as women, right? But situations have since changed quite a bit, okay? And women nowadays, female students are more assertive than before, okay? But still, you find teachers' attitudes remain somewhat unchanged. Okay, but of course, since there are now more female teachers, okay, the situations have become much better. All right, so let's take a look at let's continue. Okay, somewhat. Let's say when we talk about this here, some boys, okay, generally high achieving high achieving high achieving ones, okay, high achieving, let's say white students, they receive more than their shares. Okay, all right. Minority group boys like girls tend to receive much less attention from the teacher in both America and Canada. Okay, the imbalances of teacher attention given to boys and girls are particularly dramatic in science class. Okay, in science class, and we'll talk about mathematics later on. Okay, boys would question on the subject matter, say science subject matters, 80% more often than girls. Okay, so you see here that class sex discrimination in the classrooms shown by teachers, right? Shown by teachers. Okay, stereotypes are perpetuated in many ways, some obvious, some subtle. Say guardians, counselors, okay, parents and teachers often do not protest at all when a bright girl says she doesn't want to take any more math or science courses. But when a boy of the same ability wants to forget about math or science, they will object. Okay, so guidance, counselors, parents, and teachers. Okay, they will object. Okay, all right. Well, in these subtle ways, students stereotype expectations for themselves can be reinforced. Is that right? All right. So sometimes the girls, they're good at math, but because of because of their expectations, they tend to fulfill what is expected of them. That's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, self-fulfilling prophecy. All right. So let's take a look at sex differences in mental abilities. Now, from infancy through the preschool years, most studies find few difference between find few differences between boys and girls in overall mental and motor development or in specific abilities. Okay. Now, during the school years and beyond, psychologists find no differences in general IQ on standard measures, but these tests have been designed and standardized to minimize sex difference. That is to say, it's kind of normalized, okay, for sex. Okay, but then the overall IQ scores of males and females are not significantly different on the average. However, scores on several subtests show sex differences. All right. So you see here, in general, before 1974, boys are better than girls in spatial ability. And then after 1974, because of normalization, differences have virtually disappeared, except one on tests that require mental rotation of a figure in space. Here, males are faster, okay, though not more accurate, okay, just speed, okay. Well, this quickness in mental rotation of objects has been related to male participation in athletics. Okay, that's what psychologists were saying. Okay, all right. So let's take a look at an interesting topic. Okay, sex and mathematics. Now, in studies conducted before 1974, males outperformed females in mathematics. Okay? Again, in studies conducted over the past 30 years, 40 years, the differences are disappearing, though males still maintain an edge overall compared to female. Right? So, that's the finding. Okay. Now, when racial groups are studied separately, African American females outperform African American males in high school mathematics. Okay. There's little or no difference in the performance of Asian American girls and boys in math and science. Right? So that's the general finding. All right. And the difference in mathematic performance between males and females is more pronounced among academically talented students on scholastic aptitude test, that is the standardized test students in United States they must take. Okay, it's very much like the Canadian test of basic skills in Eastern Canada, and also our provincial test. Right? So the SAT, okay, you see the difference in math performance between males and females is more pronounced, as I just mentioned, among academically talented students. On SAT, the quantitative test or the math test, the highest scores still go to males. Well, but again, these differences were not examined by race. Okay, all right. There is some evidence. Okay, at this point, there is that male superiority on this test is related to their ability to work quickly and to estimate answers. Well, that's the conclusion arrived at by some psychometricians. Okay, they analyzed the data, but other researchers have reported that high ability boys are superior to high ability girls in math, in mathematics reasoning, even when participation in previous math courses is taken into account. All right. And now here is that the thing is that far more boys than girls take math. Okay, there's a very strong tendency for girls to drop mathematics. Okay, once they are allowed to do that, even at this point in time. So, number of math courses taken, male students take more math courses than female students. Another controversial question is whether teachers are responsible in part for the lower participation of girls in math and science studies. There is some evidence that teachers treat girls and boys differently in mathematics classes. Well, example, some elementary school teachers spend more academic time with boys in math, and then they spend more time with girls in reading. Right? In reading. Now, let me cite you an example that in one study, high school geometry teachers directed most of their questions to boys, even though girls asked questions and volunteered answers more often. Okay, several researchers have found that some teachers tend to accept wrong answers from girls, saying, in fact, well, at least you tried. But when boys give the wrong answer, the teachers are more likely to say, try harder, you can figure this out. But these messages, repeated time and again, can convince girls that they aren't cut out for mathematics. Okay, so that type of thing. And also, remember there are far more male math teachers than female. Okay? So those of you who are going to teachers college or teachers program, I advise you the following. Okay, I advise you the following is that if you can teach at least one science course, okay, for females only, you are very likely be hired. Okay, when you go out to look for a job, look for a teaching position, because in the field it is lacking female science teachers, female math teachers. Okay. Finally, bilingualism. Person speaking your mother tongue with an accent. What do you say? Well, in Canada, in the United States, and a lot of other Western countries, okay, if you speak their language with an accent, they discriminate against you. Look at this. This is the observation. Okay, this is the observation, and I don't understand. Okay, I don't understand because when a person speaking your mother tongue with an accent, you realize at once that this person is at the very least bilingual. Why do you want to discriminate this person? All right. So anyway, let's take a look at bilingualism. There is more to being bilingual than just speaking two languages. You must be able to move back and forth between two cultures or more, while still maintaining a sense of your own identity. So being bilingual and bicultural means mastering the knowledge necessary to communicate in two cultures, as well as dealing with potential discrimination. All right. Now, early research on bilingualism concluded that speaking two languages was so taxing, okay, on the mental development of the child that cognitive abilities suffered. Okay, and thus the child should learn English as quickly as possible, and without straining the without having any mental thing. All right. I remember when my first boy, I talked to my children at home in my own mother tongue. You know, my mother tongue is not English, okay? And I strongly encourage them to speak my mother tongue at home, okay? And I insisted on this. So when my elder boy first entered grade 1, the teacher in a teacher parent conference, the teacher complained to me, Mr. Chow, you should speak English to your son at home. And at that time the teacher did not realize that I was a psychologist. Okay, so I assured her that give my son a few weeks, and you realize that he will pick up, okay? Because he is at the right age to pick up language. Okay, why stop him from picking up my mother tongue? Right? So the teacher scratched her head and was still insisted. Okay, before the long goodbye, still insisted that I speak English at home with my boys. Okay, of course I desisted. Okay, but anyway, later on she learned that I was a psychologist, and so the next parent teacher conference, or she sat there and talked to me for an hour. Holy cow! anyway, so I just wanted you to realize that between 2 and 5, sometimes 2 and 7. Well, people nowadays they may even say that between 2 and 11. Okay, before the Piaget formula operation, the child can pick up a language just like this. Okay, if the child is exposed to that language community. All right. Now, so better design studies nowadays, okay, we have better designed studies show that the opposite is true. That is to say, higher degrees of bilingualism, my tongue, they are correlated with increased cognitive abilities in such areas as concept formation, creativity, knowledge of workings of language, and cognitive flexibility. All right. So these findings seem to hold as long as there is no stigma attached to being bilingual. And as long as students are not expected to abandon their first language to learn English. All right? So psychologists studying second language acquisition now believe that people learn a second language much the same way as they learn the first. Much the same way as they learned the first, by making sense of the language puzzle, building schemas and understanding what meaning. Learning the second language does not interfere with understanding in the first language. In fact, the more proficient the speaker is in the first language, the faster he or she will master a second language. That's called positive transfer, right? And researchers believe that by age 4 or 5, if the child has enough exposure to both languages, the child get things straight and speak as well as native monolinguals. Okay, so that is very impressive. That's the human characteristics. And Recent research findings point to the fact that in general, bilingual people have significantly higher IQ than their unilingual counterparts. Right? So it is important that if you have your own child, your own children, encourage them to speak another language, encourage them to learn another language. Right now, speaking about the language, okay, there are only two kinds in the world. We have alphabetical language, like I think I mentioned that right in language development. Okay, all Western countries speak and write alphabetical languages. Okay, but then in the Far East, say Chinese and all those Eastern languages derived from Chinese, they are semantic languages. Okay, Chinese is a semantic language. You see the word, you see the meaning. Okay, so therefore, so when we talk about memories, human memories, it seems that even before 1985, Harvard psychologists tried very hard to study this here, that perhaps all those English speaking Asians whose mother tongue is Chinese, they may have more encodings of a single thing than the alphabetic language counterpart. Okay? So that is to say uh, English speaking Chinese may have more ways to encode a single item than English speaking or alphabetical language speaker. Okay, that type of thing. Okay, but then I hope that we will have time. I will come to this when we discuss IQ. Okay, when we discuss intelligence. Okay, all right. Thank you.